Welcome to another episode of Football Insiders, where we go a little bit deeper on South Dakota high school football. Jason Andera, Midco Sports, along with Michael McCleary at Argus Leader Media. How are you doing this week? We're kind of in the groove now after a couple weeks of football. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, halfway through. We're about to hit the home stretch. It's it's exciting. All these playoff matchups are starting to become a lot more real. So, I'm looking forward to it.
I think we've seen some developments in especially the top two classes. An 11 AAA and 11 AA have been a lot of fun, and we always start with the biggest class, and we're going to start there this week. Harrisburg, 2 weeks in a row, has had some vulnerabilities after a really strong start. What do you make of those vulnerabilities, playing close with Lincoln and then going overtime, double overtime with Washington?
Well, first of all, I think it makes AAA a lot more exciting than it, I guess, looked in the beginning of the season. It looked like Harrisburg was going to kind of run away with the AAA state championship. But now it doesn't look so much like that anymore. I mean, Lincoln obviously had their chances, but Washington was the first team really to play with Harrisburg to the very end. Obviously, it went to double overtime.
Yeah.
I mean, there were several times in that double overtime where, it looked like Washington was actually going to win. And, I think Harrisburg is fine, obviously, still being undefeated even after having those little hiccups in there. But, I mean, it just shows that there are a bunch of teams in AAA that are kind of vying for them and probably not too far away from them.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. I think it was a little bit of a disguise when they were so good at the beginning of the year. Not to say anything like they've come down a long ways. I don't think they have. I think the rest of the class has gone to school, and they found out a couple of things. I think they found out how to take care of Andrew Walter on the deep routes. He's running a lot of the crossing stuff and a lot of the go routes that they've put a little bit of a halt to. And I also think the protection up front, they're getting to Jacob Knuth a little bit quicker. Defenses, and I credit Lincoln and Washington with two of the best defensive lines. I mean, they both put a lot of pressure on Knuth, made him get rid of the ball quickly, a lot more short passing, takes him a lot farther to go down the field, and then you have a few penalties or whatever, and that has just derailed Harrisburg, making it look so easy. But they've still stayed undefeated, and they're the top team, so they definitely still have some strengths and vulnerabilities. And as we look at this week's games, their game against Roosevelt at Howard Wood Field, Roosevelt gets their first win against Rapid City Central, and we talk about it, one of the best 1-3 teams you'll see.
Yeah, and obviously they dominated Rapid City Central,
Yeah.
and Rapid City Central earlier in the year had beat Stevens, who they had lost to, obviously in a short week for them. So maybe this Roosevelt team is starting to find their stride a little bit. Obviously, after getting your first win and trying to go on a little run to go up against Harrisburg, that's about the worst matchup you could ask for. But Roosevelt can show a lot of what the other teams in the class have been showing against Harrisburg in the last couple weeks. I don't think these vulnerabilities are a product of Harrisburg getting worse. I think the other teams in the class are just improving, and Roosevelt can continue that trend this week.
I agree. I think the more film you get, the more this thing evens out in 11 AAA. So that's one good game. A couple other games to watch. Jefferson is playing Rapid City Central. That's part of the Rushmore Bowl, and there'll also be a Sturgis-Stevens game after that. Lincoln takes on O'Gorman, Washington at Brandon Valley. What do you want to talk about in that group of games in 11 AAA, Michael?
Well, I think that Washington-Brandon Valley game is really, really entertaining. Obviously, that's two really, really strong defenses going up against each other, and just a matter of who scores more. You know, I think Brandon Valley has so far throughout the season just gotten just enough points to win, whereas I feel like Washington's offense actually has a little bit of firepower to it. So, if those defenses, are to clash, it's really just a matter of, the person who gets into the end zone first and the person who gets into the end zone last. I mean, it's going to be back and forth, and I don't know if there's going to be a ton of offense in the game, but that's going to be one of the closest battles this week.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think Washington's trend is definitely upward. Since they lost that first game to Jefferson, they've really figured out how to run the football, and Elijah Tenaya has done a great job. Blessing Tenaya has come back, and he had some injuries, but Those two guys make electric plays in the running game. The offensive line has done a terrific job. Brandon Valley, in three of their 4 wins, have only scored 2 touchdowns. And exactly 2 touchdowns in those 3 games. So they are going to have to find a way to score more than once per half to get this thing done against Washington. I think they're going to have to find some electric plays, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Noah Thompson do something on offense. He did something big in that Jefferson game on a kick return. I think they're going to need big-time players like him. Peyton Carroll has been good on the possessions. Sam Skolton has been good on possession receiving, but they're going to need some plays downfield, and I would look for somebody to step it up there for Brandon Valley. And they're at home. They're always a tough team to beat at home, and they got that win against Jefferson at home earlier this year. I think they are looking forward to playing the challenge that Washington will put in front of them.
Yeah, and I was talking to interim head coach Matt Christensen last week, and he really does believe that they can be the best team in AAA while scoring only 14 points a game. They've obviously proven thus far that they could get through half of the season undefeated that way. Obviously, they had a pretty solid output against Jefferson,
right.
But since then,
but they still got some field
then,
position help, and they got a kick return touchdown in that game. But they had a little more offense that game.
Yeah, and it's not like they overpowered Jefferson
No.
either. I think it was less than a 2-score game at that point, or maybe a 2-score game. But that was really their most lopsided win of the year,
right.
And that was not a lopsided game at all. Jefferson was in that to the very end. So, I think this is an interesting matchup for them because Washington is going to bring it on the defense, and their offense has been proving that they could get at least 3 scores a game. So if Brandon Valley can just up their offensive output just a little bit just to stick with Washington, I think that sort of proves sort of what Christian was talking about last week.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let's move down to 11 AA, and it's interesting. Brookings started the year as the number 2 team in the poll, lost to T area pretty convincingly on opening night, moved out of the poll, and then worked their way back in, and then gets a big win against Aberdeen Central. They ran the ball very effectively against Aberdeen Central, and were the first team really to help shut down Sam Rolfs, the quarterback for Aberdeen Central. Did we forget about Brookings, or do they belong in the upper echelon in 11 AA?
I think they do. After that first week, that loss to T, that probably hurt them a lot more than it would have if they lost to them this week.
I totally agree with that.
Because T obviously was coming up from single A. They were just moving up a class, and their first win, they sort of just dominated Brookings. But we've realized over the course of these past 4 or 5 weeks that T is for real, and they're going to be a team that's up there at the top till the very end. But ever since then, Brookings has been pretty much flawless. So, there's very few teams in AA that I feel like can truly match up with Brookings in a way that just to overwhelm them. And maybe now, they've just gotten better to a point where maybe they can compete with T now. But, I think that T loss looks a lot better a couple weeks out than it did in week 1.
Totally agree with you there. We're talking about physicality in 11 AA. I thought T was more of a finesse team and more of a fast team. They have shown up physically and can play with anybody physically. Brookings is right there too. I think they're one of the most physical teams in the class. And then you got Pierre, who's not as big and they're much younger, but they're playing pretty well too. And they got a big game this week against Yankton. And Yankton, of course, barely lost to Jefferson last week, had the game tied late in the game. They ended up throwing an interception to seal the game. But I think Yankton's a really good team in this class. Pierre's a really good team. What are we going to find out about these two teams after Friday night?
Yeah, and I think we were talking about it the other week that Pierre doesn't have many tests throughout the rest of the season. So, this game against Yankton is a good way for them to prove that they belong in that upper echelon. A couple weeks ago we were talking about, was it T or was it Yankton for that top spot? So,
and I still think Yankton's not that far away.
Oh yeah, for sure. This class is extremely close from 1 to 4, and I think Yankton is one of Pierre's better competitors probably for the rest of the season. So if they get a convincing win against Yankton, maybe we start thinking about maybe Pierre is still dominant in AA.
Yep, Yankton will remember Pierre coming to their field in the semifinals last year and taking care of business, or actually toward the end of the season last year. And then Pierre has just been on a roll, and they get stronger and stronger as the year goes on, almost every year. And give some of that credit to the coaching staff and give some of that credit to the team that really puts the time in to study film. Other games in 11AA to watch: Watertown is at T, Mitchell is at Brookings, Huron is at Aberdeen Central. And Huron's been in a couple close games so far, but Aberdeen Central finally took their first loss last week too. Let's move on to 11A now. We've got a 1 versus 2 battle here. Madison has looked like a potential number 1 team. Canton, they've looked pretty darn strong at number 1. They've had a couple games where they let the opponents get pretty close to them, but really no sweat for either of these two teams so far, and they play Friday night.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this game. Obviously, we talked about Madison really, really impressing last week, and Canton has been pretty much the undisputed number 1 at this point, but I think Madison can cause some problems for them. So this is going to be a really, really fun matchup. Obviously, whenever a 1 and 2 goes up against each other, that's big.
Canton's leading rusher, Peyton Eben, his dad just passed away, and we just want to send condolences to the team and to Peyton and to his family. That's always tough to play through, but that's something that Canton is dealing with on the side. As far as on the field stuff, I'll tell you what, this Canton team, they've shown that they can rush the passer. Their defense is strong. We kind of knew that going in. But this team is able to throw the ball a little bit. Josh Merkel has come in at quarterback this year and made some big plays. Madison, on the other hand, has a big-time playmaker at quarterback too with Nate Rickey. He's able to run the football, and he spreads the ball out. Mikhail Dorr, one of the top receivers in 11A, is his main target up there. So I think it's going to come down to big plays because I think both teams are really physical. Both teams are really good on defense. It's whatever team kind of figures out a way to make a big play in this game is going to get this thing done.
Absolutely.
Let's take a look. Also, another game I want to mention in 11A, Del Rapids at Sioux Falls Christian. Sioux Falls Christian has to bounce back after their first loss of the season to West Central last week. I was at that game. It was a lot of fun to see how West Central came out and really contained Sioux Falls Christian. Del Rapids, on the other hand, beat a top 5 team in Lennox, taking them as that game was close, going down to the fourth quarter, and Del Rapids pulled away at the end. So those two are another fun game in 11A to watch.
Yeah, Del Rapids' run game is really strong, and towards the end of that game, it really showed up. Obviously that Lennox win is a really big win, and sort of on the other hand, Sioux Falls Christian dropping that game. I mean, they went from a team that was ascending really, really quickly to now they're sort of just kind of stuck. I'm in their place right now. So this is a big game where Del Rapids, which is sort of on the rise a little bit, can either keep ascending or Sioux Falls Christian can go back to its upward trajectory.
All right, 11B. What's left for Winter to prove? They took their show on the road to Jim River and absolutely decimated a team that had only 1 loss coming in. This Winter team has played maybe 3 of their 4 toughest games already this year and haven't even been close. Is 11B kind of a signed deal? Is this all Winter?
Yeah, this is if there's any class where you can say that midway through the season, it's 11B. I mean, Winter has been absolutely dominant. We talk about teams coming in and maybe having dominant performances or something like that. Like, Winter has not made it close at all for any of their opponents. So you don't want to sign off on a season like halfway through it, but if there's any team that's preparing for that to be super close, it's Winter. And I think there are a couple teams that are going to be vying for that spot just with them in the championship, but right now I think you can expect them to be right there in the state championship game, and whoever goes up against them is going to have a really tough task.
Well, there's a few contenders to talk about. Last week, 2 of those contenders played each other. McCook Central Montrose took on Sioux Valley. This game was close throughout. A little bit of a turning point in the second half where Sioux Valley established a 2-score lead and then held McCook Central Montrose off. So the defense wasn't really a big part of this game, but Sioux Valley showed that they can they can strike through the air. McCook Central Montrose gauntlet continues this week. Had Sioux Valley last week, Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan this week. It's going to be tough, really tough sledding for the team that stayed in the rankings. But after this week with Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, we'll see what they're really made of.
Yeah, and Sioux Valley, Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, those probably would be the two teams that are going up against winner for that second spot in the state championship. So, that's a really, really tough stretch for McCook Central Montrose. I mean, you'd hope that they would come out in a way that they could at least stay within where they were in the rankings, but it's really tough. That's probably 2 losses in a row, and even if you take a win, I mean, that says a whole bunch about your team. So
exactly. The Ultimate Co-op Bowl is coming up as well in 11B. I should quiz you here. Do you know what TDACDC at WWSSC stands for?
Well, I know WWSSC is Woonsocket. I'm only going to say the first one.
Woonsocket, Westland Springs, Sanborn Central, of course.
The first one I have no idea.
That's Trip, Delmont, Armour, Andy Central, Dakota Christian. We've got 84 letters between these two teams. We cannot fit this on our scoreboards coming up, so don't look for it on Varsity Sports Live. But I just wanted to throw that in there that you got two teams that involve about, I didn't even look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like 8 communities. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing plays out. It
was so many letters that you couldn't even type it out for me to help me on the show. So,
all right, just something to watch in 11B. Let's move on to 9-man football, and we had something absolutely crazy happen last week. Jovey Christensen, and again, records in this state are always kind of a gray area because nobody actually keeps the records. But we do have, the oral tradition passed down, and we believe that Jovey Christensen set a record in 9-man football with 547 yards and tied a record with 9 rushing touchdowns in the game. You had a chance to talk to Jovey of Alcester Hudson. What did he have to say?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is I was at their practice the other day, and, all they were talking about is how, their opponent this week is only going to be talking about the guy who had 547 yards and not the fullback who had 30. So, they're trying to use that to their advantage a little bit. But yeah, I mean, obviously they went up 30-0 at the start of the game, and, the intention was that maybe Jovey could take a little bit of a backseat because 9-man football, you play both ways. If there's a lot of scoring, you're running up and down the field quite a lot. So you want to take a little bit of a rest, maybe not, have your players taking hits every single play, but Centerville just kept on coming back, and Jovey, they ran 3 plays, just a pitch, a draw, and a power. Jovey said, and Centerville couldn't stop any of them. So it was one of those games where I was talking to people around the team, and it was just one of those once in a lifetime. He hit every single hole, and he obviously broke 9 touchdown runs. Pretty much all of them except for 2 were, runs over like 30 yards.
They were all long touchdowns. It wasn't like he was just diving it in from the inside the 5-yard line.
Yeah, so he tied a 9-man touchdown record in addition to what we think setting a 9-man yards record. I mean, I would be surprised if somebody had 600. but yeah, it's funny to hear him talk about it last week, and then now this week it just sort of, it's another game week. I mean, you got to move on, and he can't get 600 this week, so got to just find a way to, I guess, respond.
Well, the only way this happens is, usually if you have one team that is scoring like this, the game's over by halftime because you have the 50-point rule. The only way this happens is that Centerville was in the game, and Cole Edberg, their quarterback at Centerville, threw for 515 yards to keep his team in this game.
Yeah, and 7 touchdowns.
Exactly, and 7 touchdowns. So that's what made this game such a record breaker, is that both teams were finding a way to score.
Yeah, the final score was 70-54.
Right.
I mean, I guess based on the difference, it wasn't a very close game, and the Centerville got a touchdown pretty late. I think it was 48-70 with like a minute left to go in the game. So you know, it was a pretty convincing win. For Alcester Hudson. I mean, but Jovey scoring 9 touchdowns. I mean, it's really hard to keep up with that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, you know, Cole Edberg and Centerville really fought pretty much as hard as they could.
They did. That's one you won't see every week in South Dakota high school football. Another great game in 9-man football. We got to talk about Canton Freeman. They got down by 3 touchdowns to Garrettson early on. Came back, huge second half, tied the game, went to overtime, ended up scoring in overtime, winning at 56-50 over Garrettson. So a top 5 battle in 9AA. And Garrettson's been in some really close games this year. And they've played a really tough schedule as well.
Yeah, is that 3 overtime games for Garrettson or 2?
I know they were close with Hanson, but I believe they lost. And then I know for sure they went overtime with Viborg Hurley and Canastota. So they've had a lot of close games. Yeah,
I mean, and they've, you know, we were talking about them in the beginning of the season. They were winning those close games in the beginning of the season.
Right.
Now, I guess it's not sort of going their way, but, you know, they've proven to be a pretty good team, and it is a fun class.
It's a fun class, and both those 2 teams now have 2 losses on the year, and it wouldn't surprise me to see either one of those teams find a way to continue to win in the playoffs. So I think 9AA, a lot of fun this year to watch. Speaking of 9AA, Canton Freeman is at Chester. Chester had a week off last week. They had their first loss 2 weeks ago against Howard. I think these 2 teams are, you know, have the makings to do exactly what Canton Freeman and Garrettson did last week and just have a real banger. Harriet-Selby area takes on Ipswich, a battle of undefeated teams. Ipswich still undefeated in 9AA. We're not talking about Ipswich a lot, but if they get a win against Harriet-Selby area, I think it's time to start talking about Ipswich a little bit. Both these teams, by the way, play at Northern State's new facility on the football field in Aberdeen. So kind of a spotlight on that one. We hope to bring you highlights of that during our abbreviated Varsity Sports Live at halftime of our second game that we're telecasting. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Platte Geddes at Woolsey-Wessington. Both these teams started out the year as number 1 teams. Both of them have 1 loss so far. It'll be a lot of fun to see which team comes out of this game with 2 losses. It's going to be pretty striking to see one of those teams with 2 losses early on.
Yeah, I mean...
Or late on, I guess.
With almost in a similar case to Brookings, Woolsey-Wessington sort of has gone the similar route where they lost to probably the undisputed number 1 in 9A, DeSmet, where DeSmet has just been like completely dominant, almost like at a similar level as Winter is in 11B. They've just been, you know, they haven't really played many close games, and you know they've been hitting the 50-point mark pretty frequently. So
every week.
So yeah, I mean, the Woolsey-Wessington is still a team that, you know, should be in the mix for, you know, one of those 1 or 2 spots. You know, obviously just a bad draw against DeSmet in week 1, and you know that was probably the closest game that DeSmet played all season, and it could have been a product of just a week 1. You know, maybe they weren't totally there. Kalen Gary obviously didn't play most of this first half because he was out with cramps. But the second half, actually. But you know, Woolsey-Wessington's a good team. They got some really solid players there, and obviously they got you know, a storied program that is typically you know, at the top. So
yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. You got Grayson Hansen on Platte Geddes. You got Marty Gone, who ran for over 200 yards last week for Woolsey-Wessington. Most of those in the second half. I think a lot of great players in this game. That's definitely one I'll keep tabs on. Another undefeated battle in 9B. We've had kind of a revolving story in 9B this year, but Avon is still undefeated, and they take on Gavo-Volin, who is still undefeated, and this game's at 2 p.m. on Friday. So I'm gonna hoping I can get to that game. We'll see if that works out. But who knows? Undefeated teams in 9B. One of these teams is going to come out the favorites. Time to move on to our Q&A section. We got a question in. Actually, this is from last week. Avery Tannehouse. It was a good question. Who's one name, and we might give you 2, we are going to hear at the next level? So who's going to be a college impact player? And, of course, we have college impact players all the time around this area. And And lately it's been, two or three or four kids who are potential FBS players, and then we've got another group of dozen or so FCS Division I players, and then we got a ton of good Division II players around here too. But let's focus on maybe some high-level FBS player potential who are playing right now.
Yeah, we mentioned too. The first I'd like to mention is Gabe Gutierrez, who's a linebacker for Lincoln, and he does some running too. But I think at the next level, he's probably a linebacker. But he's as a junior, he's sort of like he's the spiritual leader of that defense.
Yeah.
He's a really hard-nosed player, and he tackles hard, and he's a very good run defender, and he's got some athleticism, obviously, as we see from his running game. So maybe that pass coverage can grow over the course of time there. So he's a really talented player who I think is only going to get better.
Yeah, I think we're not college football scouts, but just watching on a high school football field, there's a couple players that just stand out. I think Gabe is definitely one of them. Tons of tackles for loss. Just a junior, super athletic. He's got the right frame to play at the next level. So whether it's an FCS or FBS or who knows, I think Gabe Gutierrez is definitely a guy to keep an eye on. Another guy I got to talk about is Abe Myers. This is a guy who just started playing football as a freshman, had been a cross-country runner in middle school, never even thought about playing football, got onto the field, and he took to the position pretty well. Probably the fastest, the fastest guy on Washington. He's a defensive end. He won the 200-meter dash at Howard Wood last year as a sophomore, and now just a junior. And he's been getting after quarterbacks all season long. He's got some help on the other side with Kendis Ledbetter, but I'll tell you what, Abraham Myers has a lot of promise.
Yeah, and it's funny because they're pretty much opposites when it comes to their pass rushing technique. I mean, Kendis is a really big guy who gets after the quarterback on power pushes to the quarterback. So it's very interesting, the 1-2 punch that Washington has, and how many ways they could attack the quarterback. But Abraham Myers, I don't think there's a lineman who could keep up with them sliding on his feet. He's just super fast off the line, and obviously
his
if you give him
upper body
space,
strength is good to be able to. He can get the swim move off, and then like you said, the speed off the edge. That combination is lethal.
Yeah, it's the 1-2 punch that makes Washington's defense probably the best defense in AAA. They obviously got some good secondary options as well, but you can't really get back better than that pass rushing duo. Abraham Myers and Kendis Ledbetter are they're probably opposites in the way that they rush the quarterback, but they combine to make a whole just unbelievable pass rushing defense.
Those two are both in the class of 2023. We of course know Jacob Knuth is going FBS from the class of 22. He's the only FBS guy for this year. So just a few names we thought we'd give you. Thanks for the question, Avery. Let's get to what we're covering this week. Got some good games coming up this week. Do you have a plan yet? Where are you going to be?
Yes, so Argus is going to be two places. We're going two different classes this week, which typically we focused on the AAA. Now I wanted to go see a AA team, so I'm going to be at T-Area Watertown. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a great game. Obviously, T-Area has been one of the surprise teams probably of this season, just because they've gone up a class, and maybe we weren't totally sure how they were going to be able to handle that.
I don't think they were totally sure, to be honest.
Yeah, because obviously this is a pretty new roster for them too. Yeah. So credit to their culture and being able to make that move, but they've been obviously really good this year. So wanted to get a chance to see them, and Watertown is a really formidable opponent for them. And elsewhere in the state, we're going to be at Brandon Valley, Washington, which I mentioned earlier. I think is going to be probably the best game of the week.
Probably
at least
two best
in AAA.
defenses. You mentioned how good Washington's defense is. Well, Brandon's right there with them.
Yeah, for sure. So we're definitely going to have a presence there, because I think that's going to be probably a close game until the very end. And Brandon Valley is used to playing close games, but Washington's probably going to be their biggest test so far of the season.
Yeah. On Midco, we've got a doubleheader. We've got the Midco Rushmore Bowl. We start off checking out Talon Ashley, Griffin Wilde and company for Jefferson, who are at Rapid City Central. That game starts 6 o'clock Central Time, 5 o'clock out Mountain Time. And then our second game is Stevens and Sturgis. So we'll get to check out Stevens as they try to rebound after a couple losses. and they take on the Sturgis team, and that'll be late. And then the halftime of that second game, we'll have a condensed version of Varsity Sports Live. We won't have the full version after the show because it goes on so late, but we will have highlights from some of the top games around the area, including number 1 versus number 2, Madison taking on Canton, two of the best teams in 11A. So, I think we got it. Anything else you need to add, Michael?
No, just excited for another week of high school football.
It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll see you next week on Football Insiders.